followed by the second most important aspect in the religion of Islam. And that aspect is وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ, to establish the salah. And this is something that we often discuss both in khutbah and in classes. When the Prophet ﷺ is telling us إِقَامَةُ الصَّلَاةِ, to establish the salah, it is different from praying the salah. The Prophet ﷺ, and in the Quran, you will never hear just praying the salah as being something praiseworthy, but those that are praised in the Quran is وَالْمُقِيمِ الصَّلَاةِ, those who establish the prayer. Because to pray the prayer, anyone can do it. A person prays today and then they stop praying. A person prays, but yet their whole salah takes less than 2 minutes to pray. They pray very, very fast. Those people have prayed, but they have not established the salah. To establish the salah, it takes far more effort on a consistent basis, meaning that you not only pray Fajr, but you pray Dhuhr, and you pray Asr, and you pray Maghrib, and you pray Isha. Not only do you pray 5 times a day, but you try your best not to delay the prayer. Not only do you pray wherever you find yourself, but you make a sincere effort when you are able to come to the masjid and pray. Not only do you come to the masjid, but you make this part of your daily routine life in general. So you see, just looking at what Iqamat Salah means, it is not just praying, it is much more. And some of the scholars, they used to say that part of the Iqamah of the Salah, to establish the Salah, it is to arrive early for the Salah. For many of us, we often rush. Last minute, we rush, and some people run to the masjid when actually it is against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to run towards the masjid. So these are just some of the things that distinguishes establishing the salah from just praying the salah. And what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises in the Quran is the establishment of the salah. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ, and to give the zakah. Now, zakah in Islam, it is not just emphasized, but it is a pillar from amongst the pillars of the religion, to such an extent that if a person denies zakah, if a person denies zakah completely, then they are no longer Muslims. And this is the consensus of the majority of the scholars. This is why Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he fought the people who, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, stopped giving the zakat. They said, once the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he died, many of the tribes, they said, we used to pay the zakat to Muhammad ﷺ. Now, the Prophet has passed away, so we will not give any more zakat. And they thought that the religion was attached or was about a single person, a single man. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he would not accept that. And this is actually a problem that we often face. Many people, when they give, whether it is zakah or donations in general, they give as long as they are happy with the organization or the masjid or the institute, whatever it might be. And once the leadership changes, once something happens, then they'll say, oh, I don't like this person anymore, so I will not give it. And they forget that they're giving for the sake of Allah. When you give for the sake of Allah, then people don't matter. People don't matter. And you give it in a way where you anticipate a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So zakah is something that is fundamental in the religion. And another beautiful thing about the zakah, or charity rather, sadaqah in general, and zakah is part of charity. But charity in general, and we'll find out more about it in the upcoming classes. In Islam, charity is much more than just money. In Islam, charity is much more than just money. Because if it was only about money, then only the rich people would be able to be charitable. But not everyone is rich. But yet there are still things that every person can do. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that something as simple as at-tabassum fi wajhi akhi, to smile when you meet your brother in Islam, that is sadaqah, it is charity. Al-ilm al-nafi', the beneficial knowledge, it is charity. Spending your time helping someone, it is charity. The point here, brothers and sisters, is that charity is much more than just the money that you have in your pocket or in your bank. Because once you realize the charity, that you can be charitable with many different things in life, it will change your perspective. It will change your perspective. And you will find many different opportunities to be charitable. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, wal-hajj, and hajj. The hajj is the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, al-Mukarramah, the Kaaba, where the people set out, both men and women, towards the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to spend a few days, about 5 days in total, performing certain monastic rituals, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the reward for a hajj that is accepted, al-hajj al-mabrur, it is a very immense reward. The Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith, al-hajj al-mabrur laysa lahu jazaa'un illa al-jannah, that the accepted hajj, the one that is done in the same way that the Prophet ﷺ did it, the reward for that is nothing less than Jannah, paradise itself. And because Hajj is such an undertaking, it is not a must upon everyone. Not everyone has the means to perform Hajj. This is why in many other hadiths, the Prophet ﷺ would often say, and it is mentioned in the Quran, مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ إِلَيْهِ سَبِيلًا, that whoever can afford, is able to find a way towards it, meaning to perform Hajj. In other words, if you are unable, then there is no Hajj that is required from you. Then there is no Hajj that is required. So what is this istita'a, this the ability that is needed? The scholars in Islam, they've said there's two aspects. The first aspect is istita'a al-maliyya, meaning that a person has to have the means, the financial means to perform the Hajj. You have to not only have the money for the ticket, but the hotel, your stay, the food, everything in between, you need to be able to cover it yourself. And on top of that, you have to, if you are the husband, you have to leave behind for your family what is sufficient for them. Okay, so it's not just that you pick up and leave and you say, I'm good doing Hajj, you guys take care of yourselves, but there needs to be an understanding. And then the second part is al-istita'a al-badaniyya, meaning to be physically capable. To be physical or physically capable, not to be so old that a person cannot walk by themselves. Perhaps a person is bedridden. Perhaps a person is not mentally there, or they might have such fragile health that they're unable to go for a trip like Hajj. Then in that case, we say the Hajj is not a must. The Hajj is not a must. And one thing that I wish to emphasize on, especially for the younger viewers, is that we need to change this mindset. What mindset am I talking about? I'm talking about the mindset where many young Muslims think to themselves, Hajj is something that you do when you're old. When you reach 60, 70, 80 years old, that is the moment that we think about Hajj. But the simple question is, who promised you life? Who promised you life? We do not know how long we will live for. And the reason why many people think that they will do Hajj when they become older is based on another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, whoever performs Hajj, an accepted Hajj, he will go back after that Hajj the same way the day that his mother gave birth to them, meaning sinless, without any sin. So what is the implied meaning when people say they will do Hajj much later in life? The implied meaning, not always, but for some people, is I'll do what I want now. I'm going to sin anyway, so let me do what I want, so that once I become older and I have time in my retirement, that is when I will turn back. That is when I will make tawbah. That is when I will start praying. And that is when I will go for Hajj. If a person has this mindset, then that itself is a problem. If you remember in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, for those of you that were part of that, we found out that the brothers of Yusuf, when they were plotting against Yusuf, some of them wanted to kill him, others they wanted to throw him into a well, a pit. What was it that they said? They said, we will do this, وَتَكُونُوا مِنْ بَعْدِهِ قَوْمًا صَالِحِينَ. And after it, we will become good people, pious people, righteous people. And this is a major problem that many of us fall into, is that we do something wrong and we convince ourselves that I will set everything straight tomorrow. I will make up for it tomorrow. When in reality, tomorrow is never promised to anyone. And then, finally, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَصَوْمِ Ramadan. وَصَوْمِ Ramadan, fasting in the month of Ramadan. Now, fasting in the month of Ramadan, it is a pillar from amongst the pillars of the religion. Interestingly, fasting is not something that is unique to Muslims. And we're even told about that in the Quran itself. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. That all you who believe, Fasting has been prescribed for you in the same way that it was prescribed upon those before you, the nations before you. So from that verse, we understand that the people of Isa, alayhi salam, for example, they had part of their religion was to fast. Same with Musa alayhi salam, part of the Sharia at that time was for them to fast. So fasting has always been there in the previous generations. Of course, sometimes with the different Sharia, there's slight differences in the fasting, but the concept is one and the same. And I feel that we need to emphasize on the reason why we as Muslims fast, especially when we live in a place like Victoria, in the West, in Canada in general. As a Muslim, people will be curious and they want to know about your belief, right? And you might be asked a question. By the way, I heard that you Muslims, you fast in the month of Ramadan. What is the reason why do you fast? And you don't want to be that person who just shrugs their shoulder and says, I don't know. Imagine if someone is interested in your religion, the religion that you practice, and they ask you a sincere question and they say to you, why do you pray or why do you fast the way that you fast? And your best response is, I don't know, I just do it because this is what my parents do, or this is what we do in our culture. Then you are blindly following without understanding, and that itself is a problem. But when it comes to fasting, the reason why we fast, the number one response that people will always give, and I want you to repeat with me now, the number one reason is, why do you fast? Oh, I fast because to feel the pain and the suffering of others, right? This is the number one response that everyone gives. All Muslims always say, to feel the pain of the struggle of those less fortunate. Which is not wrong, don't get me wrong, it is not a bad answer. The answer is still valid because it is one of the benefits of fasting. However, the number one reason why we fast, it is mentioned in the verse itself. The same verse that I quoted not too long ago, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. لعلكم تتقون. The first reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions when it comes to fasting, it is لعلكم, perhaps تتقون, you will achieve taqwa. And what is taqwa? The definition of taqwa itself is a whole class. But to fit the part right here, taqwa in its simplest form or meaning, it does not mean fear of God. There are many times we say taqwa, ittaqillah or ittaqullah, we say fear Allah. Fear is only one aspect of taqwa. But taqwa is so much more. It is being mindful of your duties and responsibilities to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The scholars in Islam, they used to say taqwa. One man asked another man, he said, what is taqwa? Can you explain what taqwa is? He said, what do you do if you're walking down a path, a tariq, late at night and it's dark, and it's a path full with thorns, you know, those things, the bushes that have pricks on them, and it's late at night, there's no sun, there's no light out, very difficult to see. How would you walk? The first man said, if that is the case, I will pull up my clothes, my thobe, the qamis that I'm wearing, And I will pay extra attention to where I place my feet. If it's light out, I can just run. But now, because there's danger, I have to be careful of where I place my feet. And the second man said to the first man, he said, that is taqwa. That is taqwa. So being careful of what? The punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And how are you careful from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? By doing the things that Allah wants from you and staying away from the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told you to stay away from. So the number one reason why we fast is to attain taqwa. Because if you think about it, fasting, it teaches us self-control. When you're fasting, you don't only stay away from eating and drinking. The pious people, the scholars before us, they used to say, the easiest part of fasting is not to eat and drink. SubhanAllah. Excuse me. The easiest part of fasting is not to eat and not to drink. For us, fasting is all about not eating and drinking. But the way that the pious people look at it, they realize that there's much more, there's a lesson to be learned. When you're fasting, it is not just from food, you fast from sins, you fast from bad company, you fast from all the mistakes that you've done, and you try to rectify it. So, the fasting in the month of Ramadan, it is a very important aspect, but rather it is a fundamental, it is rukn min arkan al-Islam, it is a pillar amongst the pillars of Islam. A question that is often asked is, how come in this hadith you have the Prophet ﷺ mentioning all the pillars, the 5 pillars in sequence, but the Hajj and the Sawm are changed? Because normally the way the Prophet ﷺ mentions it is Hajj at the end, but here he's mentioning fasting at the end. And perhaps the simplest reason for that is that sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would change the order of mentioning it. However, for the majority of the times, Hajj is usually mentioned at the end. And Hajj is actually one of the things that became part of the Sharia towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. This is usually why it comes as the 5th and last pillar, whereas Sawm, fasting, was earlier than Hajj. So Sawm is usually mentioned first and then it's the Hajj. This hadith has been collected by Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim, and it is considered to be muttafaqun alayhi. It is considered by scholars to be muttafaqun alayhi, which basically means it is agreed on. And like we mentioned in the previous class, the highest level of authenticity after the book of Allah, the Quran, is or are the hadith that are mentioned by Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Imam Bukhari was this teacher to Imam Muslim, and the reason why the hadiths that they agreed on are so authentic, it is because they have some, if not the most strict rules that any scholar had when it comes to accepting hadith. They were so strict. It is mentioned that Imam al-Bukhari, one day he traveled very far to collect just one hadith. And when he encountered the man that was going to tell him the hadith, what this man did was he was trying to bring one of his animals close, and he was pretending like he had food for the animal. And when the animal came close, the man showed an empty hand. When Imam al-Bukhari saw this, and he saw that this man was being not trustworthy to an animal, he left the man without even listening to the hadith. And he said, the man was shocked. He said, why? You've traveled so far. Are you not at least going to listen to the hadith? And Imam al-Bukhari said, no. The only people that I accept hadith from, speaking on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ, are the ones that I can trust, even when it comes to animals. So because of that, Imam al-Bukhari did not accept the hadith of that individual. So this hadith, to conclude, is a very simple hadith, straightforward. It teaches us the basics. It is important as Muslims that we have a grasp and understanding of our religion so that we can practice it ourselves and then pass it on to the next generation. It is very sad when you see young Muslims, and even sadder when you see old Muslims, and you ask them about Arkan al-Islam and they do not know. At least a youngster, a young person can be excused. Perhaps they haven't learned yet. But what excuse do we have, the adults? If we don't know it, that is bad enough. But what makes it worse is if we don't know it, how can we expect the next generation to learn it? So this is why it is important to learn these basic things, even if it is something that we've already learned. For example, this hadith, what did it teach us? It only taught us the 5 pillars of Islam. For many Muslims, they'll say, I already know this, teach me something new. But the reality is we need to go back to these fundamental parts of the religion, because if we truly understand them in the proper way, it will reflect in our actions, in our interactions, in our dealings with others. So inshallah, we will stop here. And if anyone has any questions, please ask them either here or on Zoom. Jazakumullahu khairan.